You think you know the story. A kind-hearted maiden, a wicked stepfamily, a magical transformation, and a prince's desperate search for the foot that fits a single glass slipper. It's a tale of rags to riches, of virtue rewarded, a comforting bedtime story spun countless times across generations. But what if I told you that the narrative we know as Cinderella is far older than any fairy tale collection you've ever read, older than grand European palaces, older even than the concept of glass as we know it, or indeed, perhaps even older than recorded history itself, because buried beneath this beloved children's tale lies a profound secret, a story passed down by word of mouth for over 6,000 years, a tale not just of magic, but of ashes, of spirits, of ancient death and rebirth rituals, and something far more profound than simply finding a prince. Once you hear the truth behind the story of the lost slipper, you'll never see it the same way again. Welcome back, Darklings. Before we unearth the secrets of this enduring narrative, let's begin with the most well-known version of the tale. But listen closely, because hidden in this seemingly innocent story are echoes of something far more ancient, far more primal, waiting to be rediscovered. Once upon a time, in a land far away, there lived a kind and beautiful young woman. Her happiness, however, was tragically cut short by the death of her beloved mother. Soon after, her father, a widower seeking companionship, remarried. His new wife, a woman of cold heart and calculating ambition, brought with her 2 daughters, equally cruel and consumed by jealousy. They quickly took over the household, stripping the gentle young woman of her former life and forcing her into a life of relentless servitude. Her days stretched into an endless cycle of cleaning, cooking, and performing myriad chores, while her stepsisters revelled in luxury, idleness, and constant demands. Denied proper clothes, good food, and even a comfortable bed, she was often forced to sleep by the hearth, among the cold ashes and cinders that accumulated there. Because of this cruel and demeaning treatment, they mockingly nicknamed her Cinderella. Her only solace, her last remaining connection to joy and comfort, was a deep and enduring bond with her late mother. She would often visit her mother's grave, located in the garden, watering it with her tears. And it was upon this grave that a magical tree grew, nurtured by her grief and devotion, becoming a silent witness to her sorrow. One day, a grand announcement swept through the kingdom. A magnificent royal ball was to be held. A lavish affair spanning 3 consecutive nights, where the handsome young prince would at last choose his bride. The stepmother and stepsisters were overjoyed, their minds consumed with dreams of grandeur. They spent days meticulously preparing their elaborate gowns, styling their hair, and perfecting their manners, all while cruelly mocking Cinderella's despair, reminding her of her place and her inability to attend. As they departed each evening in their finery, leaving her behind in her rags, alone and heartbroken, Cinderella wept by the hearth. Suddenly, in her deepest moment of despair, a magical helper appeared. In some versions of this ancient narrative, it's a kindly bird descending from the tree on her mother's grave, bringing her what she needs. In others, it's a benevolent old woman, almost famously a fairy godmother shrouded in starlight, with a wave of a wand or a rustle of leaves or a quiet command. Her tattered clothes transformed into a magnificent gown, shimmering with impossible light and adorned with jewels. Simple gauds became a splendid golden carriage. Ordinary mice turned into spirited horses, a common rat into a dignified coachman, and mundane lizards into elegant footmen. But there was always a strict and unbending condition. At the stroke of Baas, midnight, the magic would vanish, and everything, the gown, the carriage, the horses, would revert to its original, mundane form. She arrived at the ball, radiant beyond compare and utterly unrecognizable, even to her own stepsisters who stood beside her. The prince was immediately captivated, his gaze fixed solely upon her. He danced only with her, oblivious to all others. Over 2 magical nights, She charmed the entire court, but each time, as the clock struck 12, she fled in a whirlwind of silk and mystery, leaving him bewildered and longing. On the third and final night, as the clock began its dreaded chimes, striking its final note, she fled in a panic. In her frantic haste, descending the grand palace steps, she lost one of her glittering slippers. The prince, utterly smitten and desperate to find her, seized upon this sole exquisite clue. He declared to his kingdom that he would marry the maiden whose foot fit the singular, exquisite slipper, no matter her station. His search was meticulous and unyielding, taking him to every house, every village, every corner of the kingdom. It led him, at last, to Cinderella's humble home, where her stepsisters, blinded by ambition and envy, desperately tried to force their feet into the impossibly tiny shoe. Some of the older versions of this tale are far darker, almost unsettlingly grim, describing how the stepmother, in her ruthless ambition, ordered her daughters to mutilate their feet, cutting off toes or heels to fit the slipper. But each time, the deception was revealed, often by birds or doves, with chilling rhymes proclaiming the blood in the shoe. But when it was Cinderella's turn, despite her ragged appearance, despite the ridicule of her stepfamily, the slipper fit perfectly, sliding on as if made just for her. And in that very moment, the magic returned, or perhaps simply affirmed, her true identity revealed in a flash of shimmering beauty. The prince, overjoyed beyond measure, took her as his bride, and they lived, happily ever after. Or so the story goes, in its most familiar iteration. The tale you've just heard, with its specific elements of the magic, the midnight curfew, and the glass slipper, is closest to the version popularized by Charles Perrault in his 1697 collection, Histoires du conte de temps passé, also known as Mother Goose Tales. Over a century later, the esteemed Brothers Grimm published their own version, Aschenputtel, which notably omitted the specific fairy godmother and glass slipper, opting instead for a magical tree, birds, and far grimmer elements like the stepsister's brutal self-mutilation and the symbolic blinding by the birds. But the fundamental narrative, the downtrodden maiden, the lost footwear, and the desperate search for a perfect match doesn't start there. In fact, by the time it reached these esteemed European folklorists, it was already incredibly, impossibly old indeed. The earliest known literary version, preserved on a Greek papyrus from the unnist century BCE, tells the story of Rhodopis, a Greek courtesan living in ancient Egypt. Her narrative contains striking parallels to Cinderella, a beautiful woman, a tiny gilded sandal, and a remarkable intervention. In this tale, an eagle, often seen as a messenger of the gods, swoops down and steals one of Rhodopis's sandals while she is bathing. It then flies across the Nile, dropping the sandal directly into the lap of the pharaoh while he is administering justice in his court. Intrigued and seeing this as a divine omen, the pharaoh immediately sends out a kingdom-wide search for the owner of the unique sandal, eventually finds Rhodopis, and, as fate would have it, makes her his queen. Even earlier still, some scholars point to a Chinese variant, Yexian, recorded in the 9th century CE. This is a remarkably complete Cinderella story, featuring a girl named Yexian whose magical golden slipper is so tiny and unique that it becomes the object of a king's search. Her magical helper is a fish, explicitly stated to be the reincarnated spirit of her deceased mother, who provides her with magical clothing. And her stepmother is, of course, a figure of profound cruelty. But here's the profound truth. While these early written accounts are invaluable, providing tangible evidence of the tale's antiquity and global spread, they are still just snapshots of a much larger, older oral tradition. Folklorists, those dedicated scholars who collect and analyze the stories passed down through generations, have identified this story pattern as one of the most widespread and enduring in human history. It falls under the Arne Thompson Uther, ATU, Index, a comprehensive system for classifying folk tales by their recurring motifs and plot elements. This particular story is categorized as ATU 510A, the persecuted heroine. There are over 700 known versions of this specific narrative scattered across the globe, from the vast plains of Asia to the ancient lands of Europe, from the diverse cultures of Africa to the indigenous communities of the Americas. Each version, while adapted to its unique cultural context, invariably retains the same core ingredients: an unjustly suffering protagonist, a mysterious or magical aid, a transformative event that elevates her status, and a recognition through a unique item, often footwear. And this leads us to the truly astonishing discovery. In 2016, a groundbreaking study by a team of researchers from Durham University and the New University of Lisbon employed sophisticated phylogenetic analysis, a cutting-edge scientific method typically used to map evolutionary relationships in biology. Like tracing the lineage of species, they adapted this method to study folk tales, treating them like living organisms, analyzing how certain story patterns evolved, branched out, and spread over immense stretches of time. By comparing thousands of different versions of the tale across various cultures and languages, they essentially built a vast, intricate family tree for folklore. And what they found regarding ATU 510A was truly profound. Cinderella's tale goes back an estimated 60 years. Let that sink in for a moment. This means it predates the invention of writing, which emerged in Sumer around 3500 BCE. It existed before the construction of the Egyptian pyramids, which began around 2580 BCE. It was being told before the rise of the first great Mesopotamian cities. It is a story so ancient that it originates from a time that most historians consider prehistory, a narrative passed via word of mouth across countless generations, carried through vast human migrations, through devastating wars, through the rise and fall of empires, and across millennia. And somehow, impossibly, remarkably, it survived. So, the crucial question then becomes, why does this specific pattern echo across so many cultures and so much time? What deep, universal truths? What ancient fears or hopes? What forgotten rituals are we remembering when we tell this story? Let's begin with that strange, pervasive element of the ashes. Why is she called Cinderella in English? Aschenputtel, Ash, Puttel or Ash Girl. In German, Cenerentola in Italian. Why is her designated place by the hearth, among the cold cinders and soot? This element appears in countless versions, consistently emphasizing her degradation, her low status, and her association with dirt and neglect. Some might argue it simply symbolizes her poverty, her grief for her lost mother, or even her purity among filth. But in many ancient cultures, across a vast array of spiritual traditions, ashes held a far deeper, more sacred, and often transformative meaning. Ashes were the potent remnants of fire, a sacred and purifying element that symbolized both destruction and renewal. They were often associated with transformation, purification, and, crucially, communion with the dead. In ancient traditions, sitting in ashes or covering oneself in them was not merely a sign of physical discomfort. It could be a profound ritual of mourning, a deep expression of humility, a symbolic death, or a preparation for a spiritual rebirth. Think of the biblical tradition of sackcloth and ashes for repentance or profound grief, where the act symbolized humility and a turning point. In many indigenous cultures, ashes from sacred fires were used for powerful cleansing rituals, for protection against evil spirits, or for healing. So what if Cinderella's name and her association with the hearth isn't just about her literal degradation, but about her being in a liminal state, a state of profound transition, a symbolic death and subsequent rebirth from which she emerges purified and ready for her true nature to be revealed? She is, in essence, cleansed by fire's remnants, shedding her old self to become something new. And what about the magical helper? Is it a benevolent fairy godmother? A talking fish? A kindly cow? Or a magical tree growing directly on her mother's grave? In the Brothers Grimm version, white doves descend from a hazel tree on her mother's grave, bringing her beautiful dresses and advising her. In the ancient Chinese, Ye Xian, a magical fish, explicitly stated to be the reincarnated spirit of her deceased mother, grants her wishes, and provides her with magical clothing. This recurring motif of a supernatural benefactor is incredibly significant in folklore and mythology. Folklorists and mythographers have given it a specific name: the ancestor spirit helper motif. It embodies the powerful cross-cultural idea that the deceased loved one, almost invariably the cherished mother figure, continues to aid the suffering protagonist from beyond the grave. The magical garment, the impossible escape, the transformative aid, these are not just convenient plot devices to move the narrative forward. They are profound echoes of ancient beliefs in the enduring power of ancestral spirits to intervene in the mortal world, to guide, protect, and even elevate their living descendants. The magic isn't arbitrary, a sudden deus ex machina. It's a direct manifestation of a spiritual connection, a mother's undying love transcending the boundary of death. The tree on the grave, the talking animal, the benevolent fairy, a later Christianized version of an older nature spirit. These are conduits for the sacred, for the power of the beloved dead to interact with and shape the lives of the living. This suggests a world where the veil between life and death was far thinner, where communication with ancestors was not only possible but expected. And then there's the shoe, the singular, often enchanted, slipper that becomes the ultimate symbol of recognition and destiny, fitting only one perfect foot. Why a shoe? Why not a ring or a locket or a unique piece of jewelry that would be equally distinctive? In many ancient cultures, across diverse civilizations, footwear carried immense symbolic weight. Sandals and shoes were not merely protective gear. They were deeply personal items, often imbued with the wearer's identity, their status, their journey, and their very soul. In ancient Rome, the act of taking off one's sandals could signify the end of a long journey, a moment of profound respect before entering sacred ground, or the beginning of a ritual. The exchange of shoes was frequently part of marriage ceremonies, symbolizing a transfer of authority, a binding agreement, or the intertwining of destinies. To lose a shoe, then, could be interpreted as losing a part of one's identity, or perhaps as setting fate irrevocably in motion, leaving a tangible piece of oneself for destiny to follow. In some ancient legal systems, particularly in the Middle East, the act of passing a shoe or sandal signified a transfer of property or a legal right. Consider the biblical story in the Book of Ruth, where a man takes off his sandal and hands it to another as a formal act of transaction, signifying the transfer of land and associated responsibility. The perfect fit of Cinderella's slipper, therefore, is not just a happy coincidence or a whimsical plot twist. It is a sign of divine right, a preordained union, a profound spiritual recognition. It's a literal manifestation of destiny, a visible and undeniable proof that this specific woman is the one chosen, the rightful bride, the true queen. The slipper is more than an object. It is a spiritual key, unlocking her true status and destiny. It's a magical signature that only she can sign, a divine confirmation of her worthiness. It acts as a bridge between the spiritual and the material, confirming a destiny already written. So what kind of story is this, truly? When stripped of its familiar Disney gloss, it may look like a simple children's fairy tale, but it walks and talks like something far older, far more profound, a mythic passage, a ritual of transformation, a journey from the realm of degradation and symbolic death, the ashes, to a new existence of power, recognition, and prosperity. It belongs to a vast and ancient family of myths stretching back thousands of years. stories of figures undergoing profound suffering, receiving supernatural aid from beyond the veil, and ultimately being recognized and elevated to their rightful place. Consider other hero narratives across time and cultures. Many myths feature orphaned or persecuted heroes and heroines who, through trials and divine or magical intervention, ascend to power. Think of figures like Psyche in Greek mythology, a mortal woman of stunning beauty who is subjected to a series of impossible tasks by the jealous goddess Aphrodite. Through her perseverance, and often with the aid of unexpected helpers, like ants, a speaking reed, or an eagle, Psyche eventually achieves godhood and marries Eros. Or consider the countless tales of heroes proving their worth through impossible feats, often guided by unseen forces or divine favor. Cinderella's narrative echoes the universal archetype of the initiation journey, a pervasive pattern in mythology and ritual. This journey typically involves a symbolic death, a period of trial, suffering, and purification, followed by a triumphant rebirth into a new, higher status or identity. Her time in the ashes is her symbolic death, a period of obscurity and suffering. Her magical transformation and visit to the ball represent a temporary descent into the extraordinary, a glimpse of her true potential. And her recognition by the shoe, followed by her marriage to the prince, is her glorious return and rebirth into a new, elevated existence. She isn't just marrying into royalty. She is fulfilling a destiny, embodying a new, divinely sanctioned status. Perhaps the lost slipper is not just about finding a physical bride, but about finding one's true self, one's authentic spiritual identity, one's divine destiny. Maybe the prince isn't just a royal suitor, but a symbolic figure representing the divine, or the collective recognition of society, seeking out the soul worthy of true union and elevated status. The entire story can be viewed as an allegory for the soul's journey, from humble origins and trials, through spiritual purification, to eventual enlightenment or divine union. It's a narrative of resilience, of hidden virtue, and the eventual triumph of inherent goodness over external adversity. The enduring power of Cinderella lies not just in its charming narrative, its hopeful message, or its fantastical elements, but in its deep resonance with universal human experiences. The longing for escape from suffering, the struggle against injustice and oppression, the hope for transformation, and the deeply ingrained human belief that inner virtue and goodness will ultimately be recognized and rewarded. This tale, shaped by countless voices over 6 millennia, continues to whisper to us across the vast expanse of time because it taps into something profoundly human and deeply ancient. It reminds us that even from the lowest of places, shrouded in ash and despair, with the right kind of magic weather, from a guiding fairy, a beloved ancestor, or simply the powerful, undeniable force of fate, destiny can be revealed, and a true self can ascend. So, maybe the story of the lost slipper isn't merely fiction, a light-hearted tale for children, but a profound memory, a distorted echo of a time when such transformations were understood not as whimsical magic, but as sacred rites, as spiritual ascendancy, as the undeniable hand of fate guiding individuals to their preordained place. And if that unsettling thought has taken root in your mind, if you're beginning to see shadows of ancient truths in the stories you thought you knew, wait until you hear the truth behind the slumbering princess. Come back to hear another chilling true story behind your favorite fairy tale if you dare. See you in a future video.